All right. Just can you guys hear me okay? Make sure the audio is working. Nice. Okay. 3 weeks. We haven't seen each other for 3 weeks. Well, I mean, like, we technically had an interaction in the middle there where we did the midterm, but for the most part, we haven't seen each other for 3 weeks. So let's take a look at what happened in those 3 weeks. We had a holiday. We had me sick. We had your reading week, right? So 3 weeks that we didn't have any interaction with each other. There was a lesson that was published for one of those weeks, and that would be this one, the Validation, Sanitization, and Normalization lesson. So hopefully you guys did review that lesson. Super important. Because we need to know how to do validation, sanitization, and normalization for not this week's lesson, thank God, but the following week. This week's lesson is a little bit lighter, just coaxing us back in because it's been 3 weeks. Tonight's lesson is going to be on the include. So yes, it was published. It was sitting in Blackboard, but it was never taught. I wanted to reserve it because it's such a complex topic. It's very tricky, and it's one of the ones that I feel that a lot of the PHP instructors, not just at Georgian, but PHP instructors in general, whether they're like online courses, tend to avoid. And I think the reason they avoid it is because it's very tricky to teach. It's a very tricky topic to help people understand. But it's important, especially when you're working with PHP. It is super important when you're trying to make everything in your application, the term I'm going to use is dry, which stands for don't repeat yourself. So it's a very important topic, and I want to teach it tonight. The good news is, too, it's a fairly short topic. So it's only might take us 2 hours to get through the whole topic, and then we'd be done. But it is a really big topic. That being said, there is no quizzes tonight. There's no labs tonight. But there will be a quiz and a lab next week, just to give you a heads up. I have not marked the midterms. I know you want to ask about that. I haven't marked the midterms yet. I've marked all the labs. I will be marking the midterms this weekend for sure. So you will have your marks for the midterms up by then. That's basically it. And I will be announcing the project not next week, but the following week. So your big term project that you'll be expected to do, and then you'll have 4 weeks to complete it, so not too bad. Cool. Last time we talked about validation, sanitization, and normalization. Well, we didn't talk about it. I taught it. Hopefully you watched the video. In that video, I talk about classes in PHP, which is a super important lesson on how to build a class in PHP. This shouldn't be new to you, though, because you likely would have talked about this in your Intro to Programming class, about how object-oriented programming works, what a class is, what properties are, what the methods are, or functions within the object, right? What all these different things were. We took a look at building a class in PHP and defining the class, how to define public and private properties in a class, how to define a constructor, right? So the constructor is our way of being able to fire off a function whenever this object gets instantiated. We took a look at how to define public methods in the class, and as well as defining private methods in the class too, which you might have as well. We talked about getters and setters and why we use getters and setters. But all of this, even though it seems like a very big topic, it's surprisingly enough we don't really touch classes very much in this class. We don't work with the class-oriented programming very much in our Intro to PHP, and mostly due to the fact that it can get quite extensive if you get into building, really extensive classes and stuff. So we try to stick with just procedural programming, very simple, basic programming. The reason why it was important to understand what a class was and what an object was is because we got into the topic of actually creating a connection that was reusable using Pdo. And Pdo uses uses object-oriented methods in order to interact with it. So it was super important that you understood how that worked. So that's kind of the major reason why I wanted to go over working with classes. After that, we got into validating, sanitizing, and normalizing. So validation is ensuring the data that you're getting is the correct data in the correct format. Sanitizing is removing any potential threats in that data, or not even necessarily threats, but just removing any garbage or any noise from that data. And then normalization is converting or modifying that data into a format that you're expecting in order for you to be able to put it into your database. And then we went through doing that on our insert.php, just a simple example of actually transferring that over. So we will be doing a lot of validating, sanitizing, and normalizing in the upcoming weeks. Not necessarily tonight, though. In fact, we're not doing very much CRUD at all tonight. But we will be doing it in the upcoming weeks. So if you have not watched Lesson 5, this is your pre-warning to definitely watch this, consume it this week, and get it into your head for next week, because you're going to need it. All right? Any questions about Lesson 5 that you may have had before the midterm? You'll notice that I was kind and did not put any of Lesson 5 on the midterm. Which hopefully you guys appreciated, but yeah. Is the code not on this lesson? Like the code from that lesson's not sitting on Blackboard? I thought I did put it up. Maybe I did not. Let me just double check, Gurlene. I'll see if I did. Usually I do. The starter files are there, but no, the completed lesson is not there. So yes, can you send me an email actually, because it's a better way for me to remember. If you send me an email, then I'll remember to put it up. Otherwise, I'll probably forget. But tonight, I will likely put Lesson 6 up onto GitHub and then copy it over to Blackboard. All right, cool. So this is a short lesson. Something I would like to cover tonight, though, if we get the chance, is GitHub, right? So I want to go through this process, do these two things, and if we have time, I would like to teach you all GitHub and getting the things up onto GitHub if we have time. If we don't, I have to judge it because I find that GitHub takes about an hour to teach in total, and if we don't have an hour left, then it's not really something I can teach. I find that it's a difficult subject for a lot of students coming into it, and I tend to wind up with people getting kind of like lost in it, that's for sure. Haha, you're funny, Manjinder. The only thing is, I love Slack. I love that you guys use it, and I appreciate that you use it. But when it comes to things that I have to remember, it's better to email me so I do remember. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, literally every place you're going to work for is going to ask you for GitHub. I know we do. It's one of the minimum requirements we have, even for co-op students, that you at least understand how to use GitHub. You will learn it in literally every class you take, pretty much. So it's something that you will definitely get used to. All right, so let's go through and grab our files. So I'm going to go to Blackboard. I'm going to go to Weekly Learning. I'm going to scroll down to Lesson 6 where it says Including Files. And I'm going to click on the starter files and download that package. Once it's downloaded, I'm going to say Show in Folder, which is going to take me here. And I'm going to extract all. And I'm actually just going to extract it in the Downloads folder because this weird folder actually has a lot of nested folders and we need to pull them all out. So I'm going to say Show Extracted Files when complete. Just check that box and click Extract. And there's my Lesson 6 Student Edition folder. Once I have that folder, I'm going to click in, and I should see two folders called Includes and Require and Normalizing Paths. So just leave that open in another Finder window where you've been putting in your examples, likely under your WAMP64 www comp1006 directory, where we've been adding all of our live examples. If you forget how to access that directory, you can just open up WAMP. Once it boots up and goes green, once it goes green, go green, please. There we go. Once it goes green, click on it, and then click on the www directory, and that will open the directory for you where your files that are served to the internet are. Double click on comp 1006, and then that will take you into the directory you've been using for our live files. Right click, choose new and folder, and create a new lesson 6 folder in there. Once you've done that, you can go ahead and take the 2 files that are inside that zip that we had, or the 2 folders I should say, the includes and requires and the normalizing paths, and drag that into the lesson 6 folder and let go. And then those will copy over and dump into our lesson 6 folder. Now that I've done that, I'm going to double click on the lesson 6 folder. I'm going to right click and choose to open with code, or you can just go ahead into your IDE, whatever you're using for an IDE, and open it up inside. That also works. The last thing I'm going to do is take this window and dock it over to the side. And I'm going to navigate to my local host /comp-1006, and I should be able to see a directory of all of my lessons in there. And I'm going to click on lesson 6 because this is where we're going to start. And the first thing we're going to start with tonight is the includes and requires. So you can click on that directory and open it up, and you'll see just a bunch of empty things. So let's talk about this a bit. What is include and require? Well, I have a nice little picture I drew. Here's my picture. And in my picture, this is Tom. He's our little user. Say hi, Tom. Hi, Tom. Tom wants to access our content. That's what Tom wants to do. So in computer programming, our goal is always to ensure that our code is dry. Dry stands for don't repeat yourself. Hopefully I'm not the only person who said that to you at this point. Hopefully a lot of people have said that to you. This is because we want to have better, maintainable, and testable code within our application. So the smaller the modules are, the easier they are to maintain, as well as the easier they are to test. It also makes them a lot simpler in the fact that we can reuse them often, right? So the idea is if you're writing twice, you should only be writing once because you should be turning it into a function. So you should never be writing code twice. Duplication of code makes this difficult to guarantee. If we have used hard-coded values everywhere and we want to change that hard-coded value because our requirement has changed, we now have to go through our entire code base, find every place we reference that value, and change it. So what do we do to make that much easier? We create a variable, right? And the variable is the only thing we ever need to change. We just change the value of the variable, and everywhere through our code, that value will automatically be changed. So that's the whole purpose of keeping our code dry. Don't repeat yourself. Dry, dry, dry. It's the reason that languages have functions, right? So that we don't have to rewrite code blocks over and over again. It's the reason we have variables, so that we don't have to worry about hard-coded values everywhere. It's the reason we have constants, which is the same reason why we have variables. And it's also the reason we have classes, right? Classes are fantastic because they describe business requirements, essentially. It is also the reason why most have the ability to include or require a file's contents. So if you've worked with C or C++ or C# or any real C-based language, include should be a term you've likely heard, which basically all include does, we've seen it a couple of times because we've used it a couple of times. All include does is copy the contents of your file and paste it in the place that you wrote the include statement. Literally, it pastes it in place. So the interpreter comes through, interprets all the PHP, grabs the contents of that file, and just punk, right where you called the include thing, that's where that content goes. That's why if you define a variable inside a file and then include it, that variable becomes accessible to you in the rest of that code base, which is not necessarily a good thing. That's why some people don't really like this, but that is the case because it's not scoped. So the include and require commands function the same way. They copy the contents of a pass file into the location of a function call. The executing file will then parse the contents. Studying the figure below will help you understand what occurs when we include require a file. So this is the figure below. So here I have a file called index.php. Tom has accessed this file called index.php. In my index.php, at the top of this file, I have a phrase that says include header.php. And at the bottom of the file, I have an include statement that says include footer.php. What happens is the contents of this file get copied and jammed up here into the top of the index file, and the contents of the footer get copied and jammed into the bottom of the file. The end result is what gets interpreted and parsed is this content here that you see as HTML. So it is literally just a copy and a paste. A copy and a paste. Tom doesn't care because it doesn't affect Tom. What happens here is irrelevant to Tom. Tom only cares about the blue box that comes back to Tom because that's the only thing that's relevant to Tom. So Tom requests the index.php. Index.php includes the content from the header. Index.php includes the contents from the footer. It parses the new constructed code. The new code is sent in response to Tom. So includes and versus, so there's there's 4 types altogether of ways to copy code into your file using include or require. Require is another term. The first 2 that we're going to talk about are include versus include once. Would you use any HTML files there? No, you can't. That's the only problem. So you can't really include an HTML file. You have to or can you? I've actually never tried. I can't believe for as long as I've known PHP, I've never tried to include an HTML file before. I don't actually know, Marcus. Mostly because I've never done it. We should try it at some point. Just try to include an HTML file in one of these things and see if it works. I think it has to be PHP. Like, the index.php file would have to be a PHP file regardless, because otherwise the include statement wouldn't work. But maybe the other files could be HTML. Have to try it. All right, so include and include once will complete the same task. They do the exact same thing. They copy the contents of a file and paste them where they were called. The one key difference between the 2 is how many times they're allowed to execute for the provided file. Okay, so include can be called as many times as you choose and will execute literally every time. So if I include here, so I've got my index.php file. So under the includes and requires, open up your index.php file. Just going to back down one more. There we go. And this thing's ridiculously huge here. There. Let's make it 150 instead of 900. Alright, so we have includes and requires. So this is where we're going to put our first block of code here. So include me a bunch of times. So add the above code in the appropriate place. If you navigate to the file, you will see the output. So what we're going to do is we're going to use include and see how many times include actually executes. But we're going to do it in a loop. So I'm going to write a PHP block here. So hopefully you guys haven't forgotten how to write a PHP block. And I'm going to use something called a for loop, right? I think we've done one of these before. So I'm going to define my initial variable, so $i equals 0. Then I'm going to check a condition, so if $i is less than 5, then I'm going to create my accumulator. So I'm going to increment I by whatever, plus 1 each time. And then I'm going to run my include statement. So I'm going to include /include me a lot.php and close that with a parentheses. So I'll give you the file name just because that will be the likely thing that we will likely mess up, but that's what we got. So I'm looping over 5 times. This will iterate 5 times, and each time it will include this file. So let's see what happens when we refresh the screen. So there we go. This is a song that doesn't end. It goes on and on, my friends. Some people started singing it, not knowing what it was, And they'll continue singing it forever just because this is the song that doesn't end. I don't know if you guys have ever heard that before. But anyways, it just goes on and on again, my friend. So what you'll notice is that regardless of the fact that we've already included it, it just keeps including it over and over again. As many times as we call it, it will include that particular block of code. And if you look at the contents of includemealot.php, so let's just open that up. Include me a lot. You'll see it's just this paragraph, right? Literally the content you see here as a paragraph, if you were to inspect it, you can see it's a paragraph that's been included 5 times containing that content. Right? So it's exactly the contents of this page being included into this spot 5 times. No changes made to it in any way. So include me only once works a little different. The way include me once works is it doesn't matter how many times you attempt to include it, it will only ever include one time. It won't allow the content to be put into the file over and over again. So again, we can write another for loop, right? Whoops, helps if we put it in PHP. And we'll just do another for. I is less than 5, then $i plus plus. Like so. And this time we'll do an include once. And we're going to include me once.php. And if we refresh this, regardless of the fact that I told it to include 5 times, it only did it once. Even if I jack this up to 5,000 times and refresh, we only get it one time. So include will include as many times as it's been called. Include once will only ever include one time, will not include multiple times. Does that make sense? Cool. So let's talk about include me if I exist. So there's include and then there's require. So while the functionality of include and require are essentially the same, there is one significant difference between the two, and that has to do with how errors are handled. Is this used for security reasons? I'm not sure what you mean, Marcus. Why would you limit to once? It's not for security reasons so much as, say you have a file that you're using for a configuration, and you have a bunch of constants defined in that file. This is a common use case, actually. So you have a bunch of constants defined in that file, or you have a bunch of functions defined in that file. You don't want to include that again, because if you include it more than once, you'll wind up with symbol conflicts, where a function has already been declared, and then you're attempting to declare the function again, right? So include once avoids that problem where you don't wind up including the file that contains all the functions or contains all the variable names or whatever again and causing symbol conflicts. Does that make sense? Yeah. So while the function of include and require are essentially the same, there is one significant difference, and that's how errors are handled with it. Basically what happens is include, if you try to include a file that doesn't exist, it'll throw a warning and say, I'm sorry, this file doesn't exist. Fix it, right? I can't find this file. However, if you try it with require will actually fail, entirely fail, and you will wind up with your code exiting and it just having a fatal error, okay? So let's take a look at what that looks like. So include me if I exist. So down here we're going to say PHP include I don't, this is ridiculous. Why did I name this? I don't exist, so I'll copy and paste this. I will cause a warning.php. That's ludicrous. Why would I create a file name like that? Trying to pretend I'm witty, I think. There we go. Sorry about that. And then, just to show that this is a warning, I'm going to write another piece of code below it. If this throws a warning, it will execute the next line of code. But the warning won't prevent me from executing. Okay. So I'm including this file. This file doesn't exist. If you look, this file is not a part of our file list, right? So this file doesn't exist at all. But this doesn't prevent this warning from executing. So if I refresh, here's my warnings, right? Include I don't exist, failed to open stream, no such file or directory. And then this says include failing opening, blah, blah, blah. So I get two warnings basically telling me, hey, the file doesn't exist. You tried to call it, but it doesn't exist. However, the application is still executing. I can still see all of the code still parsing out. And I can still see my echo statement, right? So there's my echo statement telling me that regardless of the warnings, it's not preventing it from executing. So include, you need to be aware of this. If you're including a file that is absolutely imperative to your application running, or at least that page running, then you need to make sure that you don't use include, because include will only throw warnings, right? Which won't prevent the rest of the page from executing. The rest of the page will continue to execute. So if we were to do the same thing, but with a require this time, and not an include, so where's my require? So we got to scroll down a little further. So hopefully you've got this written out. We got to scroll down a little further to the bottom of the page here where it says require me if I exist. And I think I put it at the bottom because that way it can fail down at the bottom and won't stop the rest of our stuff from working. So we'll need a PHP block again. And this time we're going to say require, right? And it actually doesn't really matter what we put in here. So I'm just going to put asdf.php in there because I don't feel like writing out don't exist so I will cause a fatal error.php. I mean, if you want to, you can. It doesn't really matter. The file doesn't need to exist. And this will never execute. So there's really no reason to write this out. Is there? There we go. So I'll refresh my screen. And boom, warning. It says warning, but then there's that fatal error right there. Fatal error, failed open requiring asdf.com. And notice, I'm trying to scroll. My little wheel's spinning here. And I can't scroll any further because I can't see that echo statement. It has fatally died. The whole script has crashed. So no luck. So if it's unimportant and it's just like, yeah, it'd be nice to have that kicking around, I'll include it. If it's there, it's there. If it's not, blah, then use include, right? But if it's important and you absolutely need it, then you should be using require to avoid, having your script execute, have it kind of fail and tell you that there's a problem. I mean, both of these are throwing errors regardless, so both of them are telling you there's a problem. The difference is that if you're in a production environment, these warnings don't show up. So if the warning doesn't show up in the production environment, you're not going to know that you're missing your file, right? You're missing your very important file. Things are likely having problems and you don't know why, but unless you go into logs, you're not going to know. So that's one thing. And then the other thing too is like with the require, when this fails, you're going to 100% know because the rest of the page will just stop and you'll see no more progression of your code on that page. So require over include whenever it's an important file, right? Which, I mean, arguably they're probably all important if you're including them. I can't really think of a reason why you would care if a file didn't include, if you went through the effort to include it. So I don't know. I tend to always use require over include. All right, so let's talk about nested includes, because this is where things get really, really tricky. It's like tricky Ricky, okay? So including files is handy for drying up our application. However, it can get tricky Ricky when dealing with nested include statements. For example, in index.php, right here, I'm attempting to include a file in the folder includes. So I have a folder here called includes. The file in the file in there includes a file located in the root of our example. So let's write out the code and then we'll take a look at the diagram. So in here in our nested includes, we're going to have a PHP statement here, like so, and we're going to say include /_ include, so that's the name of the directory, include within include.php. And I'm going to copy that path for you and very kindly provide it. And we'll refresh here so you can see what's happening. All right. So I'm including a file outside of my folder. So right now, I'm including this path, right, which is going into this directory called includes, right? And in this includes directory, I'm including within the include. So this file is what I'm actually asking for. And it's going in here and copying the contents and replacing this block with whatever contents are in there. However, there's a trick. This file here says I'm including a file outside of my folder. So that's fine, that's working because it says I'm including a file outside of my folder. But I want to include another file that's actually in here instead. So I'm not including a file inside this folder, I'm actually coming out of the folder and including one of these files instead. So let's see which one we're going to include. We are going to include, and I need to step out of my directory, right? So this is how you would normally do this. You would step out of the directory, so // and now I'm into this includes and requires directory, and I want to include the nested include. All right, so let's take a look at the diagram so you can kind of see what's going on here. So inside here, inside my index.php page, right, I'm including within include. So I'm grabbing this file from this directory here, and then this file is grabbing this nested includes from outside of itself. So it's kind of like a round robin, right? So this includes this file, and this file includes this file. I'm being included in the _includes folder. So let's see if all this actually worked. Anybody want to take a guess? Do you think it's going to work? Let's say yes for yes and no for no. Probably. Oh, Minjinder's taking the safe approach. Matt says no. Minjinder sticks out his tongue. Got some maybes in there. 50-50, but he's not placing bets. All right, let's hit refresh. We got some warnings. Warning, failed to open stream. No such file or directory in the Comp 1006 Lesson 6 includes and requires includes include within include.php on line 3. So it's saying this file doesn't exist. Okay, well, let's take a look at where we are. We are in this directory. I need to, this is using your relative paths, right? So these double dots mean move up a directory, right? So now I'm out of here and I'm into here. This is the directory I'm in. And access the nested includes.php. Well, that's exactly where it is. So what's gone wrong? What has happened that this file isn't loading? I know, includes lost its word. It's lost its value. That's right. Nested include is in includes. No, it isn't though, right? So if you look, it's not in this folder. It's in this folder. But you are on the right track, believe it or not. Like Chasham Deep, if you look at this, you are on the right track. So here's why Chasham Deep is right. This is the executing file, right? So this file that we are in right now is the one that's being loaded into the browser, right? When we call this include, it executes from this page. It executes from this area. And so it's saying, hey, yeah, I'll include the contents of this file. So it includes the contents, and when it goes to include this, it's not including it from the includes directory. It's actually including it from the includes and requires directory. Which means everything needs to be relative to the executing file. Exactly. You have to do it relative to the original include. So, Manjiner, you are completely correct. If we change this to 1 dot and hit refresh, our error goes away and everything works. And the whole reason is because it is relative to our executing file. Yes, Matt. Exactly. So you can see why that's a headache, right? You can see why building a PHP application is going to get really, really tricky when you've got all these different nested includes, because this happens all the time, and now you're trying to make sure that you're following all these relative paths. So what is the solution to this problem? Does anybody know what the solution is to this problem? I'll give you a hint. Instead of using relative paths, we want to use blank paths. This might be new to you guys. Yeah, but then we wind up with a directory just full of files. We don't want that either. We want to be able to put our files in their respective spots. So the word I'm looking for is absolute. So instead of having a path that is .nested includes, right? We would actually have the path of localhost. So it would look like this. http://localhost /comp-1006 /includes and requires, like that. So it's a full path, but we can't use HTTP here. No. Instead, we have to reference it as a file path and not a web path. So that's super important to understand. So this should work. Yeah, you see, it gets tricky when you're doing this because you want to make sure you're executing from the correct directory, and the local host directory is likely not the correct directory. So it's probably that. Nope. Where am I executing from? Oh, right. So we need the C. C://wamp 64/www. Does that work? I mean, we just need the full path, but I can't figure it out right now. We'll figure it out in a bit. Yes, so there's ways around that, Matt. So that's the cool thing about this. This is a bad way to do it. We don't want to hard code the path because, like Matt just pointed out, if we're on a different server, How do we know it's on C drive? How do we know it's in this WAMP64 folder? It probably isn't. It's probably in some other directory. How do we know where our reference point is, right? And that's super important. We need to know where that reference point is. Actually, I'm missing lesson 6, aren't I? This may have worked, actually. Yeah, it works. So how do we know where those points are? Now, I should be able to do just the root directory. That is one way to do it. Nope, it doesn't like that. Let's try that. Nope. I wonder what root is. Maybe root is lesson 6. Sometimes that happens. Nope. I'm not sure what root is. But the point is, though, is we have to give it a full path of the file in order to link it properly. So there are ways for us to work around that and actually do that properly so that we can get the correct path in place. So that brings us into our next topic, which is normalizing files and link path roots. Now, do you guys need a break? Because it says break on my notes. We kind of jet through that pretty quick. Do you want a break or you want to continue? Gerlene says, go on, charge forward. Continue. Alrighty. Alright, let's continue. So we're going to talk about normalizing paths. So I'm going to just back up and go to normalizing paths, which is going to load up a blank screen right now with nothing on it. So we have some stuff here that we're going to have to do. Hold on, I'm trying to look for... I've got countries, includes, utilities, partials. Somewhere I have the SQL for this. Unless somehow I've dumped the SQL for this. Did I include it at the bottom? Nope. Hello, SQL. Not sure what I did with the SQL. But we do need it. So let me see if I've got it in my note folder. I don't see SQL in there. Nope. Countries, nope. Includes, partials, nope. Utilities, nope. So no SQL. Huh. Nope. I guess we'll have to create it from scratch. Interesting. Okay. We are going to output countries. We're going to create a countries page. I've given you all the code, actually. It's time to let SQL go. You know, I could just flip on a dime right now and we could run a DynamoDB if you want, Alec. We could just rock out DynamoDB and all of you will complain to the coordinator. Alright, so the issues with relative paths described in our include versus require lesson should illustrate the problem with relative paths. Relative paths, it says here, are file paths or URLs that start from the file they're referenced from and navigate from there, but really what are they? They're train wrecks. They are absolute train wrecks because they make your code very difficult to follow. You're literally relying on the location of a file. You should never have to rely on the location of a file. Okay? You should definitely be able to put the file wherever you want and it should just execute where it needs to execute from. But that requires not using relative paths. So we're going to take a look at this file structure that I've created here. This would be... I'm not going to say this is the typical way an application is built, but it's not wrong. It's definitely in the realm of. So it's not odd to have an index file, right, where you would put your entry file. So that's the file that you're going to come in on. A config file where you would put all of your configuration information at the root. This file's location will matter, but it's the only file that will. CSS under a CSS directory. I imagine when you guys were building HTML, you did that. You put them either under a CSS directory or under a styles directory. Countries, this is our resource here, right? So it's got a PHP file inside here. Definitely going to want access to that. And then our includes directory. Our includes directory, these are things that we're expecting to be able to include in other files. So for example, I've got a utilities directory for any type of utility type functions I want to create, which can make my life a little easier. Things like our connect script, right? And then a partials directory. And in the partials directory, these are reusable pieces of information. So things that I might want to call more than once. So my navigation, for example, my header, my footer, and perhaps a little country block or something that I want to call. So these are reusable pieces, and I call them partials. That's a hint, by the way. When you move on into other classes, you're going to learn a little bit more about things like partials, which are reusable pieces of, they're reusable views, essentially. So, as I pointed out, there's a lot of issues with relative paths. We definitely don't want to wind up using relative paths in this scenario. We want to make sure that we're using the paths in an absolute way. So the confusion that comes with relative paths exposes the need for use of absolute paths. Absolute paths start at the root of our application, right? So the root of our web server, actually. Whatever is considered the public entry point. This ensures that any file reference is always a direct path location. So for example, if I needed to include, say, my partials country.php, I would do so by referencing c://wamp64 www comp1006 lesson 6 examples. Normalizing paths includes lessons blah 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 utilities whatever, right? I'd have to go down that whole path to access this directory in total. Actually, I think I can copy it. Copy the path. I would have to access that, which I'm obviously not going to hard code because that would be a gigantic pain in the butt. And like some of you have pointed out, we don't want to have to reference this portion, right, at all, because this could change. This is very likely going to change, so it doesn't make sense to reference it each time. So cool, now there's not mistaking where the file is. The include has an absolute path, so it can fetch the file directly regardless of which file we call include in. Unfortunately, not that simple. That path works on my machine, but if you're on a Mac, that path's not going to work. If you're in Linux, that path likely won't work. If we're on a different web server, that path's not going to work. So it also won't work on our live servers if when we push to them, which we will do at some point. I just don't know when. So how do we get an absolute path no matter where our code is located? So it doesn't matter what server it is on or what machine is on, that it will work dependably for every person running that code. That's a bit of a trick. So let's take a look at file paths versus link paths. It's important that we understand these concepts. A file path is a file located in the file system on your computer, right? So it's on your hard drive, somewhere in your computer. That is a file path. These will begin with a drive letter and then be constructed with a various directory references till we reach the file you're attempting to access. So like c://wamp64 www comp1006 lesson 6 examples index.php, for example, right? That's a file path. A link path or a URL is a browser-friendly reference to a file. So it's different. A link, like a hyperlink that you create, yes, well, it is referencing a file. It's referencing a file on a server somewhere else. It doesn't know the root location of that file. It doesn't know that it's in the C drive. It doesn't know it's in the WAMP64 folder. It doesn't know anything because www.example.com, well, it may point to c://wamp64 www. You don't know it. That part has been hidden from you by the web server. The web server is only connecting you to the directory that is publicly being served. So it's very important that you understand when I say file path, I mean the file on your physical computer. And when I say link path or URL, I am talking about the web link to that file. Okay? So like the link you would put in your hyperlink. So those are different. So absolute file path references. PHP allows us to set an includes directory, which is super, super freaking handy. This means that when we attempt to include a file, it will always check that directory first. So we're like, hey PHP, I'm putting all my includes files under this directory I'm calling includes. And PHP's like, cool bro, gotcha. And then it goes and checks there anytime we call include first, before it checks anywhere else in the system, before it checks anywhere else within our application. So the nice thing about this is the path will always be absolute. To set the includes directory, we're going to want that path that we provide to also be absolute. So the easiest way to determine our root path is to create a file in the root directory, which we did. It's called config.php. And that file will be used for us to put in our config information. Now this file, you will never move. You will never change its location from where it's located. It has to stay put. That's important in this process because we're going to use it as our anchor to tell where the root of our whole application is. So the benefit of creating the file in the root of our application, this being the root of our application, everything inside the normalizing paths, is we can determine the absolute file path easily. PHP has a built-in function called dir name that accepts a path for an argument. It will return the directory that the path is located in. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So we'll create a variable called dir, and we'll just execute dir name like so. And then we'll var dump its contents. I really want you to fully understand what these functions are doing and not just be running them. So $dir like so. So I'm doing this in the config.php. We can view this file by just passing underscore config.php into our browser, and then we can see here. So if I run it without an argument, I get dir name expects at least one parameter, 0 given. So I can give it a file path. That's super easy. So I'll give it index.php like so, and then I'll run it. And there we go. We see that it has created a link to the file path. So it's telling me where index.php is located. Sorry, it's actually telling me where underscore config.php is located, which is kind of interesting because that's not what I asked for. But that's what it's telling me. So we can also fill this with some constants that already exist in PHP, that are already there for us, that we can just utilize. And one of those is underscore underscore file underscore underscore. So 2 underscores, the word file, then 2 underscores. And it has to be written exactly like this. That's super important. This is a constant that's defined by PHP, and there's a whole bunch of them. You saw the list when I pulled it up there. And if I refresh, you will see that this is my directory. So it's returning this value. See? That's the directory that this file that I'm in, because that's what this is referencing, that this file I'm referencing is currently located in. It's currently located in the Normalizing Paths directory. So that's handy. So I've got this information. I now know the absolute path that my file is located in, because this is telling me what the absolute path is that my file is located in. So that's super handy, right? So now all I need to do is figure out a way to get rid of the extra stuff. I need to get rid of all of this extra garbage that's here, right? Because I only want just the root of this directory, right? So I only want the slash that comes after normalizing paths, technically. So, as you will notice, we're going to append on include. So I know I'm at the root directory in this thing. What I want to do is actually append on the includes So I'm going to do that by going /_includes, like so. And then hit refresh. And now I've got _includes at the end of my normalizing paths. So that's cool, right? So now I'm into this includes directory here. And now I'm ready to set my includes directory. So I'm going to say set include path. And that takes one argument, and the argument will be $dir. So now whenever I go to call include once, it's going to check this includes directory. We have forced PHP with this at a global level to always respect that. So every time we call include whatever file name, it will automatically start from the includes directory for us. So I guess it's a way of making an absolute path relative in sense. Yes, very much so. But reliably relative, Matt. Because even if it's nested, it will still always start at the includes directory, regardless of how many times it's nested. So absolute link paths, which we also need, are a little trickier to determine because the most we can do is get file paths from many of the tools that PHP provides. We have to do some find and replace to generate an absolute link path. So right now, we have an absolute file path. If we want an absolute link path, we have to do a little bit more magic. So if that's the case and you're inside this directory, you can't use that include. I can't remember how you get back out. There's a way. I think you still just do the double dots and then that takes you out of the directory. And then you can go from outside the directory to find the file you're looking for. So if you had something inside the normalizing paths directory, you would have to my file outside. So you'd have to do a double dot kind of thing. If you use a request command, what do you mean? Do you mean require? Yeah, I think it still works the same way. I think when you set the include path, I don't know if you have to set a require path. Oh, no, you have to set a require path as well. So yeah, technically I guess we should set both. And both make them the include path. Awesome, Marco. That helps. I didn't know that actually. So yeah, you want to set your include path and your require path, I guess. I didn't realize they were different. I hope there isn't like a set include once path. Oh no, there isn't. That's good. That would get absurd, but worth checking. All right, so this has set our absolute path references because we've anchored it to the includes directory. Now we want to set our absolute link path reference. Okay, so absolute URLs. That's what we're trying to go for. So the first thing is we need to know where the heck we are. So the way we do that is we store the document root. And the cool thing is we can get that from the global variable, right? The global associative array variable server, and just access document _ root. Let's var dump what that looks like so we can all kind of get a look at it. So I'm getting a fatal care set require. Was it not called set require? Oh, you know what? It's tab 9. The stupid thing I installed. It's tab 9 thinking it's smart. There is no set require path. That's funny. So I downloaded this thing called Tab 9, which is like an artificial intelligent code finisher. That turns out it's as dumb as a stump because it didn't understand. So there we go. Look at that. See, WAMP64WW. We know that's our serving directory. Yay us. So we have the very root of our directory, right? Now we need to figure out where this whole thing is happening from. So that's going to take a bit more magic to figure out. So let's take a look. So if we navigate to the config.php file, we know this file itself is loading under the C://WAMP64 blah blah blah, right? All the way through. So we have to take that file path, essentially, this file path. Oh, I wish I could just copy it. We have to take this file path. Nope, that's not my file path. Why is it being stupid? We have to take this file path. Bam. This file path here. And we have to take this file path here. And we have to basically chop off this part here so that we can turn it into a URL. What's it doing? Why did it add that? So we want to chop off this part so that this becomes our absolute, like this part here is going to become our absolute URL. That's what we're trying to do. So it's a little tricky, but that's essentially what we're doing. Because the URL can't have a C drive in it. It's just going to be localhost / whatever. But localhost points to the C:/WAMP64WWW, and that's what we need to chop off. So the way we're going to do that, first we're going to get the application root. Whoa. I don't know why it just did all of that. Application root, which is going to equal dir name __ file __. So we don't really need this because we already know that this is, oh, this is not this because this has the includes thing. So this gives us that directory without the includes, right? So that will be the C: all the way up to the config. Then our next step is to create our link path, which will be string replace. And this allows us to take one thing and replace it with something else. So if we hit the button here, or Control-Shift-Space, sorry, we need to give it the search thing. So we say, this is the thing that you're looking for. So we're going to say document root here. So look for document root, which is this string you see here. Replace it with nothing, just an empty string. And I want you to replace it within the directory name that you find for this file. So $application root, which is just the directory name. And then var dump our link path. So if that works, our link path is not correct. It should definitely not be C: anything, because C: should have been replaced. So if that didn't work, then I bet you dollars to donuts, folks, the document root and application root look very, very, very different. So let's go take a look and see what the issue is there. So we'll replace document root, or we'll actually output it, and then we'll var dump $application root, and we'll refresh. So yeah, can anybody tell me what the problem is? This is my search string. This is the string that we are attempting to replace with a blank thing. So we should actually be taking this out of this. What's the issue? Absolutely, Matt. It's our slashes. Our slashes need to be normalized. They're all facing in the wrong direction. They're like literally all over the place. So that's because the document root uses // and the application root is using backslashes. So we're going to need to fix these. And the way we're going to fix these is to use something called real path. real path will actually return back the correct path for us. So the easiest way is to use the real path function that PHP provides. It will return the absolute path of a relative path provided. However, it will also normalize the path variables. So how do I use real path? I talk about real path and then I don't even show an example of using the real path. So we have string replace. So I think I need to do it around application. I think I have to do it around the application root path. Hold on. Let's output it first. So we'll try real path. And that takes the string of a path. And let's see if that reversed them for us. Nope, we actually need to do it around the document root path. That's where it needs to be done. So it's this one that needs real path. There we go. And we'll refresh. And there we go. Look it. That's correct now. So we should normalize that anyways, because those slashes are kind of facing in an odd direction, especially if you're on Mac or Linux. That will not work properly because they'll be in the wrong direction. So we should actually wrap this in real path as well. And then that will correct that. Oh, no, it actually messes it up. Right, because they're going in that direction. I don't know if that will cause an issue. I think it does cause an issue for some people. I might be wrong, though. It might cause an issue if you're on a Mac. We'll have to wait and see. All right, let's get rid of all these var dumps, because now we've got all this stuff in here. Like so. And we're going to take link path here, and we're actually going to turn it into a constant. So to define constants in PHP, we just write the word define. We define the name of the constant. So that's the first thing. And then the second argument is the value. So there we go. We have base path, and base path now links to our URL. All right, cool. So this is our setting our includes directory, which normalizes all of our file paths. This wonderful large block of code normalizes all of our URLs. Yay us. I'll copy all this code for you and share it. And there you go. So this config file we'll use in our applications because it just makes things a lot simpler for us. So let's talk about dry templating. So dry templating is a term that I've given to a strategy that means we code our basic HTML structures once and then reuse it. Okay? So you will likely remember from your HTML class how tedious it kind of got when you were writing all that HTML over and over again, like especially the opening part of your HTML and the closing part, and you're like, I've written the same code 20 times for 20 different pages and only the content in the middle is changing. Why am I rewriting this over and over and over again? So there are cool things out there that make this a lot simpler that are called template frameworks. Some PHP ones are Twig, there's FAML, there's what's the other one? Brains just stopped working. It's not called Bryce. It's not Blast. It starts with a B. I forget what it's called, but it's another PHP templating language, and all of these make writing PHP a lot easier. But we're going to keep it simple and only write basic PHP. But one of the things we want to do is split our PHP into two separated pieces so that we don't have to write all that HTML at the top and all that HTML at the bottom over and over again. There has to be a better way, so to speak. So we're going to create a header and a footer, and we're going to put them inside this partials directory under the includes directory. So go to your partials directory and open up your header.php file. Then, if you're using VS Code, if you hit a single exclamation mark and then hit tab, it will populate a whole HTML document for you. You don't even need to do it, it just does it automatically. So what we'll do is I'll just simplify this and make it nice and clean. And then I will provide it to you. Alright, so we're going to call this document Drying Out Our Application. That's right, delete all the code, makes it super nice and clean. So this is called header.php. Yet we have the whole PHP page in here. We don't want the whole PHP page in here. We only want the top half of the PHP page in here. The bottom half of the PHP page we want to take out of here. So I'm going to highlight it and hit Control X on my keyboard to cut it. And then save this because this is done. So I've got the top half and a body tag. Then in the footer, I'm going to paste this and save it. So now I have this in my header and just the closing body tag and HTML tag in my footer. Now I can wrap any type of content I need in my page with the header and footer, and I can just carry that across all of my content pages. Now I also want to make sure I include my CSS. But my CSS is a little tricky. My CSS is in this styles directory outside of this directory, and I want to be able to include it properly. CSS is also a bit odd because it's not included like a file. It's included like a link, right? It's included like a URL. We don't say C:// blah 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 to our style sheets. No, we just simply reference the style sheet using like a URL path. So we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to use that wonderful config file. So the first thing we need to do in our header.php page is include that file. And the best way to do this is to use include once. And the reason why is we don't want to accidentally include it over and over again. We only want to include it one time. So if it's already been included, we don't want to include it again. Hold on, I might be doing this wrong. Is that where I want to include the config? Actually, you know what? In my notes, I don't do this, so maybe I'm not doing it this way. Let's take that out. Let's try this just with my notes, and we'll see what happens. So I'm going to create a link. And of course, Emmett didn't kick in. Link. There we go. And we need to put in the PHP code for this. So this is going to be base path, like so, which, yes, I know we don't have that yet. CSS, styles.css. So that's our base path. So I'll copy that and give that to you. And that's going in our header page. Now this is not yet initialized because we're not initializing the config, but header is never going to live on its own. You're never going to access the header.php directly. You're only ever going to access it as a part of another file. So that's one of the important things to understand. So let's load up index.php now. And we'll import this file, and we'll also import the footer file and wrap our code in it. So we have a few things to list here. So we're going to create a PHP block at the top because we have 2 includes to create. So the first one is we're going to make it a require once because it has to be there. It's not allowed to not be there. And we can get away with doing a relative URL because these 2 are always going to stay in the root folder and they're never going to move. So we don't need to worry about them being referenced relatively. Then we want to include once because we don't want it to include multiple times, but really it shouldn't kill the page, right? It should only, if it doesn't work, it shouldn't destroy the page. The page should still load. So this is where we're navigating from the includes directory. So remember, this is like we're sitting in this directory. So I'm going to access the partials, right, from here. And then the underscore header.php. Make sure you're putting those underscores in because they will trip you up if you're not. Then I'm just going to create a small thing here saying our content is going here. So you know what's happening. And then we just need the PHP include once underscore partials underscore footer php, and then that. This is one time that the actual tab 9 kicked in pretty good. It's kind of interesting that it knew I wanted the footer there. So I'm going to just take this config off of here so that I'm just navigating to the index, and then we can load this up. So right now on line 2, I'm having an issue because it says warning require once config.php. Do you see what the problem is? What have I done wrong? Why is this saying this file does not exist? Can anybody tell me why it thinks the config PHP file doesn't? Yes, exactly. We're missing the underscore. We need the underscore. So if I refresh, sure enough, we see nothing, but we do see drying out our application in the tab, which means we're definitely loading that HTML. Yes. So we have a simple navigation. We should finish our simple navigation and then import it into our page. So I'll copy this for you so you have it. There you go. I'm going to open up nav.php and I'm going to put the home link in here. And the home link is very simple, right? But remember, all of our paths have to have the base path in them so that they know where to go. So we'll do that nice shorthand equal statement and put our base path in here and just assume that this page is being included somewhere, right? Because you might be like, oh, base path must be a global variable, but it isn't, right? It's not global. It's just that we're assuming the underscore nav PHP file will be included somewhere and nobody's navigating to it on its own, right? They're not navigating to it directly. They're including it into another file that already includes the config, which sets this variable for us. So that's important to understand. So this one's a little trickier because it's not just base path. It's base path / countries, which it could have put nicely in the quotation mark and not outside the quotation mark. So there we go. We've got this wonderful nav. Isn't that attractive? It's a pretty nav. Now we need to take that nav and include it into our index.php page, but it's super important that you remember that it needs to come where the content is. It doesn't go into the header PHP, but I guess it could, right? Actually, it makes sense for it to live in the header PHP and not in the index file. So we're going to include it in the header PHP file. And this is where that nested include really comes in handy. We only want to include it once. We don't want it multiple times accidentally. So again, I can just do partials because it's always relative to the includes directory. And if I refresh, there's our menu, which has already been styled for you. So often when you're building websites, you're going to find that you have these like common little functions, right? That you're literally utilizing everywhere. You're constantly calling them, and it just seems tedious that you would literally define them in every single spot. One of those, I would say right off the bat, has got to be connecting to your database. Like, you constantly connect, you constantly call that function. It doesn't make sense that you would have to, call it from so many, write it out raw every time you need it. It makes more sense for you to just call the connection script and utilize it. So we're going to do that right now. We're going to actually we're going to create a connection script under this utilities here. So I'm going to right click on the utilities, the underscore utilities, and I'm going to create a new file called connect.php. And I'm going to show you something interesting. If we're writing only PHP, we don't need to close the PHP tag. We can actually leave it open, and that's common convention. We're going to write something a little new for you guys. We're going to write a catch block. Does anybody know what the purpose of a catch block is? A try catch? Yeah, it's for error handling. Basically what happens, we try the code out inside these two curly braces here. We try the code in here, and if it fails, we execute the code inside our catch. Right, exactly. It catches exceptions. So the exception that we're going to catch is one thrown by Pdo called Pdo Exception. And we have to store whatever it returns in this $e. And if it throws an error, we're just going to echo it out for now. So we'll just echo error in big letters. I don't know if I can do that. It might not let me do that. Put BR tags around it. I'm not sure it will let me do this because usually it doesn't let you run expressions. Hopefully it will let me run the expression. And then we want to die. Die or exit, either one. And inside the PDO spot, we're going to say DBH, which is the name of our database, new PDO, and then we have to give it the name of our PDO string, and our username and our password, right? So our username is root, and our password is just empty. We don't actually have a password. The string we're going to give it is the MySQL : host equals localhost. And the DB name, which we haven't created yet, will be lesson 06. Actually, it'll be comp 1006. Comp 1006 lesson 6. There we go. Now we haven't created that yet, so it's going to definitely throw an error. All right, so that has our error handling turned on. If anything happens, it will throw an error, and then we can catch it and read the error message that happens. All right, so that's our connect script. What are we doing with this connect script? Yeah, so requiring it once, that's because blah, blah, blah. Trying to figure out where we're actually calling this thing. Oh, we're going to call the connection script at the top of our header so that we don't have to call it multiple times. It will actually get passed on with everything we're doing. So we're always connecting to the database. This is kind of not a great thing. I wouldn't do this normally. And we want to require that once because we are going to need it. And it's under the underscore utilities underscore connect.php file. So we're literally passing this to the underscore header. Okay, so first, this code goes into the underscore connect. There you go. That's into our underscore connect.php file. And then in our underscore header, we're going to add this line to the top of the header. The very top of the file. And this is where everything's going to go south because when we refresh, unknown database comp-1006 lesson 6. So we need to definitely create this comp-1006 lesson 6. So we're going to need to open up our database. So open up MySQL Workbench. And we're going to create a new database in here. So you can just right click and choose to create a schema. Name the schema comp. What did we call it? Comp-1006-lesson 06. So I'll copy that and provide it to you guys. There you go. And then just click apply. And just leave the settings that they are and click apply. And then finish. So that creates that database for us. And I appear to have a countries table in here. Did we create one in lesson 3? We must have. Yes, we did. So actually, I can right-click that, and I can choose to copy to clipboard the create statement, and then here's the code to create that SQL table. Isn't that kind of handy? And then you just create a new SQL file and run it. And now the lesson 6 table has a SQL table called countries in it. So now if I refresh the screen, everything should be good because we now have the comp-1006-lessons 06 database and a countries table, so we are fine. So just run that create table countries under the new lesson 6 database. So we're almost done. We're getting very close to being done. Are you guys still with me? Do you need me to review anything? What? Okay. Okay, I can walk through that. So to create the database, I just right-click on this little block here, Marcus, and I click Create Schema, and then I typed out the name of the database, which was comp-1006-lesson-06. I can't zoom in, unfortunately. And then I clicked Apply, which I can't do yet, so I'll just create one called 7. I clicked Apply, and then it comes up with this window like this, and I just click Apply. It executes everything, and I click Finish, and that's it. And then if I hit this little refresh button, I now have the lesson 7 directory in there. Yeah. And I'm going to drop that schema because I don't need it. Yes, we're going to use base path every single place we do a link. So, the first place we're using base path is here with our CSS. Minjinder, do you have that one in the header.php file? Does that mean yes? Okay. And then in the nav.php, we're using it here twice. Do you have those 2 links? We haven't included it. That's the thing. So that's why I was saying that gets a little tricky. This underscore nav file, this underscore header file, and the underscore footer file, no matter what, are not being used unless they're included. That's kind of the reason why this underscore is here. I should kind of explain the naming convention here. The underscore, when you use it in PHP like that, is kind of like a naming convention that says, hey, this is an included file, meaning you're not meant to run this file by itself. Like you wouldn't go to Normalizing Paths underscore config because that's not something you should do for the simple fact that there's an underscore there. The whole connotation there is that you wouldn't go to that file directly. So we're kind of taking advantage of that whole idea, and we're basically saying these files are not files you will navigate to themselves. So we only need to make sure that this config is required at the top of this file because this is the truth file. This file is our truth. This header file now has access to all the values defined in this file because it's in the same scope. Same as this guy, it's in the same scope, so it has access to those variables. That's why. I can understand your confusion. There is a way around that, but it means basically having to figure out where you are and then somehow navigate to the home directory and then access the config file literally every single time. So this is simpler. I just told you how. So this index file is currently where we are. No, not just because it's a constant. So right now we are in this index file, right? So this directory that we're in right now inside our browser is this index file here. Yeah. So this now has access to anything defined in the config file. So, for example, if I was to go to that directory, the underscore includes directory, go to partials, and go to header, notice the errors. Right? And the reason why I'm getting the errors is because of exactly what you're pointing out. I get the errors because the underscore config file is missing. It's trying to access variables that don't exist. Like, it doesn't make sense, right? But if I access from the index file where everything is currently loading as my rule of truth, then these have access to that base path. So that's how that is working. Cool? Cool. All right. So our application has 2 pages, home and countries. Home will contain a featured country, and a countries will show all of the countries. The presentation element for a country will be the same on both pages. Instead of creating duplicate HTML for both pages, we're just going to create a partial. That will contain the HTML for what a singular country looks like when displayed. First, let's create the HTML for a country. So let's open up this country PHP page here. We're going to use a div with a class called country. Inside that div, we're going to have an h3. And inside that h3, we're going to pull all the countries out from a row. And we're basically going to say, hey, if this exists, load it. Otherwise, give me null. That's what that expression means. So this is the equivalence to writing, just so you guys are aware, this is the equivalence to writing this. That's what the equivalence is. But we can actually short form it instead of writing all of that to just this, which is kind of nice. Makes it super easy. So it basically says, this is set, this exists, and has a value. Otherwise, null. And we can do it again with description. And again with this small that we're going to produce. So row will actually be a variable defined further up. We haven't defined it yet. It's going to be defined in the index page. So row will be expected to be passed to this partial underscore country. Underscore country.php. There you go. Yeah, so it's essentially like an OR statement. So basically what this is the equivalence to, Manjinder, is if I was to write this. So if is set $row, then echo $row name. Sorry, that's not what I said. This is name. There we go. Okay. Else echo null. That's essentially what I just wrote in this very tiny little line. It's all that code. This double question mark basically says, is this set? And does it contain a value? And is the value not false? So false, null, undefined, any of those values. As long as it's none of those things, it will output this. Otherwise, or else it will output null. Cool. I mean, you save yourself 5 rows, basically, 5 lines. Like, you could write it as a ternary too, but this is just clear. So, notice the assumptions here. We are assuming we have a variable defined row. We aren't just plucking this out of thin air. It's not global, right? And it contains a country row from the country's database table. Remember, this partial, because that's what it is, that's what the underscore means, this partial will be included in another file. As long as there is a variable in that file called row defined, we won't have any issues. If there is not a variable defined called row, then we're going to have some problems. So if you try to access this file by itself, then you're going to have problems. This file has to be included in another file that's calling countries and basically grabbing the row. So let's load this in the actual countries table first. So I'm going to go to countries and to the index.php in countries, which is already populated for you. You'll notice that I've already got all the things in there. We just need to write the code to fetch the actual database information. So we've got our config, we've got our headers, which is connecting for us. So I think it is. Yeah, created this dbh file, so that's our Pdo file. So now inside that index, where is it? Inside our index, we just need to connect and grab our data, which for some reason, for the life of me, I can't remember how to do it. Right, we need to write a query. So SQL equals, I love that, SQL equal, select star from countries. Nice and easy. And then we're going to store a result by doing the $dbh and running a query on it and passing SQL to it. And that's going to return back our SQL. Now I think that returns back a weird array. I'm trying to remember how to convert the query to the other way. I don't write PHP every day, so just bear with me for a second because I have to try to remember how I did that the last time I did this. Let's go look it up. So we have inserts, index, table. No, you see I used MySQLi there. Why did I use MySQLi there? I thought we did a Pdo. Did we not do Pdo? Yeah, we did, because we have all these Pdo params. Form. That's our connection. That must not be the one I did with you guys. Oh, it is the one I did. Sorry about this. I'm trying to remember where I actually put that file. That was the email. Ah, shoot. I never actually output the contents of that file. Sorry, one moment. Yeah, I know. I need the thing that actually outputs the information. Index. I have a file that's actually like outputs everything inside. Users, profile, register. Nope, not profile. Posts. There we go. That's exactly what I want. Do query fetch all. That's what I was looking for. Fetch all. There we go. So that's rows. So that'll fetch all the queries from there. Then we're going to loop over them. So we're going to say for each $ rows as row. So this is going inside our index.php for countries. So for each rows as rows. Oh, I think I do butt those up against each other. Then we're going to include, and not include once this time, just include underscore partials underscore country.php. And that's all we need to do. And that will literally load a block for each one of these. So that should work out of the box. No errors. But we also don't have any countries in our database right now, which is not great. Let me grab you some. I will grab you some countries. It's really annoying. I don't want to do it that way. I just want the Java. I just want the... insert statements. I don't want that either. There's like an easy way to export, and then there's like the long way to export. And I don't want all of you, I just want countries. And I don't want all that, I just want the data. And I just want a SQL file, which we'll just stick in the downloads directory for now. What's a name? Create it in a single and export. Continue anyway. There is no password. Alright, it's finished. See, I wish I could just display that on the screen and not have to go through this whole hassle. Okay, you don't need all of that, you just need this. There you go. We need to run that inside our SQL for that lesson 6 database. There we go. So if I select the rows, we should have a few. I mean, it's just gobbledygook data, but it's fine enough. Yeah, it's quite a few numbers. But now if I refresh, we see nothing. But if I go to countries, see? You should see all these little things being populated. All right, so the next thing we need to do is pull 1 for the front row for our regular index page. Because right now we don't have that. Let's see here. So this time we simply connect to our database. So we're going to pull a featured country on our main page. Are you getting errors? Countries failed because it's countries.php, Minjinder. You wrote underscore countries and forgot the .php. What's your error though, Gerline? That one which we kept in the try catch? The one telling you the database doesn't exist? Is it outputting on the screen in the browser? Okay, can you copy it and then paste it inside the chat so I know what it is? Oh, it's like literally outputting that message. So that means that's not inside a PHP script for some reason. All right, that's a bit of a different scenario. Give me 1 second. Let me just finish off this part of the lesson, and then we'll do that, okay? I'll help you with that. So under the regular index.php page, like the one at the root of our whole application, this index.php here, that looks like this, we're just going to add one little piece here. We're going to add a header with a class called main heading, an h1 there, and the h1 is going to say featured country dash equals $row name or null. Okay, and then up here we're going to take that dbh file, or the value, we're going to do $row equals dbh query, and we better write the query above it. The query's kind of interesting. You guys probably haven't written this one before. Select star from countries, order by rand, limit 1, which means randomly order the countries and only pop me one back. So that will give this the SQL, and then we need to chain on. And I'm trying to remember, I don't want fetch all. I just want the one record, which I can't remember how to access. Hold on. Pdo get single row. Fetch. So it's just fetch by itself. So if that worked, I should be able to go home, and sure enough, I have a featured country. Every time I refresh, I'll get a different country. We only had ASDF in India in there, so I mean, we don't have a lot of countries, that's for sure. All right, so what did we learn tonight? Tonight we learned includes and requires, how these things help us be able to dry up our code, but also, if we're going to use them, the responsibility of needing to understand how to normalize our paths by being able to create absolute URLs and absolute file paths, right? Those are super important. Keep this config file around. It's going to come in very handy when you guys start to do your stuff for your projects and stuff. Plus, we're going to use this every single week, okay? This file is going to come in handy for us doing anything we want to do, because it basically makes, you know, creating these paths so much simpler, and it makes linking up all these files so much simpler. Now, this is a bit exaggerated, all the stuff I've done here. This is not how we're going to do it from week to week. It's not going to be this exaggerated, but we will definitely be copying, or sorry, not copying, I was reading Gerling's message at the same time. We are definitely going to be including files and doing that kind of work all the time. All right, so unless you have a problem or an error, you're welcome to go. That's it, we're done. So we end an hour early, which is pretty cool.